Protection Paladins are in great shape heading into the War Within. They have been for most of Dragonflight, and although they haven't gotten a huge rework in the next expansion, I think they've gotten exactly what they need. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to play Protection Paladin in patch 11.0. The War Within is right around the corner, it's time to get hyped, but first, don't forget to like and subscribe. In terms of changes, I think the best summary I can give for Paladins is pretty brief. Their talent tree has gotten slightly reshuffled, and there are some small changes, and some that look small and are actually kind of big, but mostly, the class just does everything it already did, but better. There's a much higher level of quality of life being baked into the class with this pre-patch, and it's stuff that players have been asking Blizzard to give Pallies for years and years, so it's pretty great. Okay, I spoke too soon. Blizzard just threw down a big, fat wad of nerfs for tanks in the War Within, and Paladins did not escape unharmed. So just to kind of run through what this really changes for the class, it makes them weaker. Specifically, it makes you take a little bit more damage, not really all that much more damage, but a little bit, and maybe more importantly, it reduces your cooldown uptime. Just to kind of show that off in the talent tree here, just to emphasize some of these talents that are being nerfed. Righteous Protector, which gave you massive cooldown reduction on Avenging Wrath and Guardian of Ancient Kings, has been nerfed somewhat, so you're going to have less uptime on Wings and Sentinel. Sentinel now gives 16 seconds of duration on that buff instead of 20, so that's a 20% nerf to the base duration. Although notably, Zealot's Paragon was not touched, which is a little surprising to me. I think I said in another video, if I were the one making the decision, I would cap the amount of extension that you get out of Zealot's Paragon rather than nerfing Sentinel, but I don't make those decisions, so that's the way it is. I think maybe the biggest change here is that Eye of Tears had its duration cut from 9 seconds to 6. That is probably the one that kind of stands out to me the most of all of the cooldown changes. And, you know, it's a pretty substantial drop in duration. I don't think this will have a huge impact for raids. Usually you just use this to kind of pinpoint, reduce the damage of a single strike, you know, a Farrak frontal or something. But this actually does have a little bit of an impact in tanking in Mythic Plus, where you might use Eye of Tear right at the start of a pull. Usually you would, and now instead of getting 6 seconds of cooldown coverage, instead of 9, you're only getting 6. So it does mean that you're going to take a lot more damage as a pally in some of those tough windows. There is one silver lining here, and that is Word of Glory's healing was increased by 10%. It's not doing so great right now, but ultimately, the takeaway from all of this is that the way that you play and the way that you spec has not changed at all. None of that has changed. The only changes that have occurred are that the class is a little weaker and the cooldowns are available a little less often. So if anything else that I say throughout the rest of this video is maybe off slightly, maybe, you know, I think everything is right, but if anything is off slightly, it would be because of some changes that Blizzard has made. And you know what? Take it up with Blizzard. All right, I think that covers this. All right, now let's move on to talk about talents. And not a lot has changed in the Paladin class tree. The only thing that's really significantly changed is that this talent down here, Incandescence, which was in a choice node with Touch of Light, has now been split off. And then the old talent that used to be here and gave a bit of increased range on Hammer of the Righteous is just gone entirely. And that's fine. Touch of the Light does add more damage and more healing than you would get out of that old talent anyway, so it's not a big deal. And then other than that, Retribution Aura has been removed from the game entirely, so there's kind of no point in taking that Crusader Aura node unless you really want to be able to move around faster while you're on a mount. But other than that, everything is pretty much business as usual in the left-hand tree, all pretty much the same. In the right-hand tree, we have our first change here with this talent Shining Light. It's a pretty traditional part of the way that prop pallies play. You know, you cast Shield the Righteous, you get free Words of Glory, except now it can stack up to 2 times, and this is actually a pretty significant shift. It really represents a huge increase in the amount of potential healing that you're able to pool up. I mean, literally twice as much that you're able to pool up for free. And that actually is really good. This has always kind of been the problem. The big bugbear for Paladins is that they have great damage reduction, great cooldowns, and then they have pretty terrible self-healing, you know, very limited supply of self-healing, and so this really helps a lot. Improved Holy Shield and Consecrated Ground have been split out into 2 separate talents. That's fine. I still don't think either of them's really all that great, but that's okay. Sanctuary has been redesigned, and check this out. Consecration now persists for 4 seconds after you leave it, so watch this. Consecration, I'm standing in it, I walk out of it, 4-second buff. Oh my god. What an amazing change. This is something that Paladins have been begging for ages, and this really is just, you know, it's such a simple thing to get, and yet it is everything that Paladins have wanted for, I think, about 7 years now, 7 or 8 years now. Paladins have been standing in consecration for defensive value. I think that's right. And, you know, this has really kind of made it so that now, instead of like having to literally drop it the second that you get out of it again, you know, you have a few seconds to move around, you have a few seconds to like reposition a boss, or you can drop it while you're walking into pull, whatever. This is really, really good. There have been some slight tweaks. Bulwark of Order is, I think, a bit more effective. It's a 1-pointer now, a bit more effective for that 1 point. I think less maybe maximum value, but, you know, still very good, very strong absorption talent. A lot of the stuff in the middle of the tree is the same. Spell Ward, Sentinel, Avenging Wrathmight, Guardian of Ancient Kings, all that stuff's the same. This talent is different, though. Light of the Titans is now a 20% extra heal over time when you cast a Word of Glory, and then that's doubled if you use it on yourself while you have a dot on yourself. This talent's still pretty niche. You know, you can use it for bosses like Farrak, where there's some sort of horrible damage over time effect that you're trying to counteract with that heal. Otherwise, it's pretty bad. And then there's this new talent, Tyrion's Devotion. I don't think you're ever going to use this. There is a fair amount of cooldown reduction on Lay of Hands, but I mean, still, Lay on Hands, that's such a long cooldown, I just think that's a dead on arrival talent. And then a lot of this other stuff over here is still the same as it ever was. Another thing that has changed here is that Soaring Shield and Focused Enmity are no longer in a choice node, so you can get 5-target Avenger Shield and then also double damage single target Avenger Shield and have both of those in the same build. That's pretty huge. Surprisingly, Gift of the Golden Valkyr hasn't been changed at all. I really thought that they would change that because it is such a strong 1-point node and such a terrible 2-point node, but they have kept that exactly as it was. And then most of these other talents are still the same, with the notable exception of Bastion of Light, which is, previously it was a 2-minute cooldown, same as it is now, and it would make it so you could just cast 3 free Shields of the Righteous, like right in a row. So that's basically 9 holy power every 2 minutes. Now instead it makes it so that your next 5 judgment casts will generate 2 extra holy power, so that's 10 holy power every 2 minutes. Not really a huge difference. Ultimately, I think that you know, it's pretty immaterial, the difference. The only thing that I would say maybe this has going on for it that the other one didn't is, you know, it is a little slower. It is a little bit more prone to like waste or whatever, so I don't love that as much, but it does actually generate holy power. There were some talents like Resolute Defender, maybe like that would not actually count as casting a Shield of the Righteous if you were casting a free one, whereas if you are actually spending the holy power, you're spending it, so it does count for all of the talents that it could possibly count for. Either way, I still think this is a very crappy talent that you basically only would ever take if you're really trying to be like a max parse goofball in raid, because it technically does add more damage, whereas a talent like Final Stand or something that's way more valuable, way more useful most of the time, doesn't actually add any damage. So if you're just going for parses, you know, you got to go with the one that gives you like 50 DPS as opposed to 0. Now, maybe the biggest change in the tree, kind of the like slept on thing here, is that Strength and Adversity and Crusader's Resolve have been moved from over here down to here, and Strength and Adversity has gotten an insane buff. It gives you 5% parry for each target you hit with Avenger Shield, and that lasts for 15 seconds. So with Soaring Shield, you can hit 5 targets with each Avenger Shield. That is 25% parry. That is a defensive cooldown level of damage reduction that's just active all the time. Insane. Now in single target, this kind of stinks. You can take Crusader's Resolve. The problem with Crusader's Resolve is that instead of being sort of a weird ramping up and down 2% damage reduction debuff for each stack, it's just a 10% melee damage reduction effect. And depending on the boss you're fighting, that maybe could be okay. I mean, if it's some bosses, maybe that's a full-on 10% less melee damage. Cool. But it's not auto attack damage or like other things. You know, there are bosses that don't do melee damage. Like if I just pull up a dungeon journal right now, I could just think of a boss in In Dragonflight, in Amirdrasil, what's her name? Can't remember her name. Naimu, Nimoy, whatever. She doesn't actually auto-attack. Her threaded blasts are not auto-attacks, so this would do 0 against that boss. Or a boss like Sylvanas who shoots instead of auto-attacking, melee damage. This would literally do nothing. And then for most bosses, Farak or whoever that do the majority of their damage through attacks, damage over time and stuff, even if you reduce their damage by 100%, they'd still be pretty dangerous because their auto attacks really are very little of the component of the fight. So when it's only 10%, not very good. So this talent kind of stinks. I think it's really underpowered considering what it is and what it's up against for the majority of content. But it is what it is. You can take it to get down a moment of glory. That's fine. So this roughly is the talent setup that I would run for Mythic Plus. It's what I would recommend for Mythic Plus. For rating, if you're really trying to be a max parse Bozo, I would probably do something like this. Depending on whether there's more than one target or not, you may not need Soaring Shield, in which case I would take Seal of Reprisal, and then I would do this. Moment of Glory, Bulwark of Righteous Fury, Farron Marcus's Fervor, Bastion of Light, Righteous Protector, all the usual stuff. Definitely switch over to Avenging Wrath Might as well in that case. I would say drop Barricade of Faith, but there's really nothing damage-oriented to take unless you wanted to take Soaring Shield. I guess you could do that in that case, but other than that, there's really nothing over here to take that will add damage in pure single target. And in the left-hand tree, there's not a ton to take over here, really. I guess you could try and drop Blessing of Protection and take like Recompense or something to add that extra 100,000 damage every 2 minutes. That's pretty much it. Alright, that's enough about talents. Let's talk about the rotation. The fundamentals of the Paladin rotation are to maintain Consecration, keep Avenger's Shield and Judgment on cooldown, and use Hammer of Wrath whenever it's available. The change to Consecration does make it so that it's a lot easier to maintain Consecration. That's pretty cool. And then, once that's all done, you spend Holy Power on Shield of the Righteous without ever letting it overcap. You cast Word of Glory on yourself or others as needed so that nobody dies. Once you have all of that covered, you use Blessed Hammer as your filler, and, I literally haven't updated this section of the guide in a couple of years. Why would I? Nothing has changed about this since, I think, Legion. Now, maintaining both Shield of the Righteous and Consecration while tanking is very important for staying alive. It is your number one priority. You also never want to let your Holy Power overcap. It is better to use Shield of the Righteous when you already have a lot of time remaining on it than to ever overcap Holy Power. Spending Holy Power reduces the cooldowns on most of your major cooldowns, so building and spending as quickly as you can all the time is always the right approach. Okay, I'll add in something here that's not usually in my guides. Trash talk. Paladin is by far the easiest of the 6 tanks in WoW to play well. I've often said it was Druid in the past, maybe you could make a case, but I think it's Pally. I've played with Paladins who did damage you wouldn't believe. And that ability to optimize damage or to, solo heal for DPS as the tank, while also tanking, really underscores just how simple and easy the Prot Pally rotation is. You smack your skills that generate Holy Power, then you smack the ones that spend it, rinse, repeat. It's easy and kind of boring. Now, as for cooldowns, you have a few really good offensive cooldowns and a big batch of amazing defensive cooldowns. Avenging Wrath is your main offensive and defensive cooldown, and in Mythic Plus, you're usually going to be speccing into Sentinel. As Sentinel, it will grant damage reduction, max health, increased Holy Power generation, and increased damage. It lasts for 30 to 35 seconds a cast with an average cooldown of 75 to 85 seconds, so the uptime's pretty amazing considering how strong it is. Eye of Tyr is a 45-second cooldown. It deals a huge burst of AoE damage. It grants 25% damage reduction for 9 seconds. It's really good for establishing threat at the start of pulls and giving you that damage reduction when you need it most. And Divine Toll's an AoE burst damage skill that's great for locking up threat at the start of pulls. It's also good for interrupting multiple casters in a single pack. Often you're going to do both of those at the same time. It's really just 5 Avenger shields at once, but, each of them generates Holy Power. It's pretty good for getting Shield of the Righteous up at the start of a pull. As for defensive cooldowns, you have Ardent Defender, which is your first lifeline in terms of defensive cooldowns. It is a 2-minute base cooldown, but Resolute Defender grants a cooldown reduction, so it's closer to 80 seconds in practice. It only grants 20% damage reduction, which is not a lot, but it also gives you an active cheat death effect, so it's very strong overall and a very versatile defensive cooldown. You have Guardian of Ancient Kings. It's a straightforward shield wall. You do get a lot of cooldown reduction on it, but you basically just use it to mitigate big bursts of damage. And then you have Blessing of Sacrifice, which is an external cooldown you can use on other players. If you take Sacrifices of the Just, it is a 1-minute cooldown. I like this a lot in Dungeons, Mythic Plus. It's also good in some situations in Raid to have that, just this huge damage distribution from somebody else into yourself on a very short cooldown. Really huge utility. You also have Blessing of Protection. This is probably the most complex of all the cooldowns that you have as a pally. You can use it to clear debuffs from yourself or to protect other players from physical damage only. It will set the target's threat to 0 while it's active, so it's great for protecting players who are being fixated, but not something you want to use on yourself while tanking most of the time. You want to be sure you have a /cancel aura macro, and I'll put one on the screen right now. I like to make it 2 lines here, as you'll see. It should say /cancel aura Blessing of Protection, and then in the second line /cancel aura Divine Shield. You want both of those in the same macro, that way you can use either of those 2 skills to like clear a bleed or something, and then immediately remove them without letting anybody else get auto-attacked. You also have Blessing of Spell Warding. Blessing of Spell Warding makes the target immune to spell damage and prevents magic effects from being applied to the target. Unlike Bop, it doesn't reset threat at all. It doesn't zero the target's threat, so you can spell ward and keep tanking. I do that all the time. It also doesn't clear magic debuffs that are already on a target. It's more like anti-magic shell for blood DKs or all flavors of DK. It has to be precast to immune the application going on. It won't clear it after the fact. Then next you have Divine Shield. You know, it's kind of the combination of both, and thanks to Resolute Defender, it's only like a 2.5-minute cooldown on average, which is... it's so crazy. You're immune to damage while it's active, and due to Final Stand, you're also AoE taunting throughout the duration. This is an absolutely insane defensive cooldown. I mean, you're immune to everything, but also able to hold threat at the same time, and it's available less than every 3 minutes. It's easily the strongest cooldown in the game for any tank. Paladins are so strong, they can't keep getting away with this. And also there's Lay on Hands, instant full heal, 7-minute cooldown, very simple. Now I want to talk about how to pull in a Protection Paladin. You can just precast Blessed Hammer to generate some holy power before the pull. This will allow you to Shield of the Righteous as soon as you're into melee range. As for actually making the pull, you want to open by throwing an Avenger Shield to establish AoE threat. That usually is all you need, but depending on your cooldowns, you can use Eye of Tyr or Divine Toll to really lock things up even harder. Your main goals are just to get Shield of the Righteous up and Consecration down. In general, it's pretty simple. Avenger Shield really does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to AoE threat, and Shield of the Righteous is there to pick up the rest of the slack. In terms of stats, Strength is the most important stat available to Pallies, so you always want to maximize your item level on armor pieces. You will want to enchant and gem for haste, and then Mastery is generally your second best secondary stat due to how it increases your block chance, which works against auto attacks, spell damage, and spell damage over time thanks to Holy Shield. Pallies are so overpowered, it's crazy. But Versatility and Crit are also both really great stats. If you're wanting to maximize damage, I think they're better than Mastery by a fair margin. Alright, in conclusion, Prot Pally is still very strong. It was great throughout all of Dragonflight, and it's only getting better in the War Within. Other classes are maybe getting more flashy, interesting stuff. I think the most damning thing I can say about Paladins is that they aren't exciting at all. They are like a Volvo, boring and reliable. But it's probably better to be so good that you've become boring than to be new and flashy. Flashy specs get nerfed. Boring, overpowered specs just keep getting buffs for some reason, and that is the cross that Paladins must bear. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.